So that's now started. So the recording will be made available to everybody at the end, or well, after we've uploaded it, along with a link to the slides. So if there are any URLs in here that you want, don't worry about having to write them down. You'll have access to the slides later on, so you can come back and have a look at anything that you want to. I will talk today about getting credit and recognition for method development with a very large focus on using protocols.io. I am Emma, Director of Strategic Initiatives there, originally a researcher, so PhD and postdoc, and then I worked in scientific publishing for almost 15 years. The most recent position before joining protocols.io was as chief editor at PLOS Biology. So I have thought a lot about credit within the research arena and how methods align alongside publications. So we will talk through quite a few examples today. As I mentioned before, please do ask questions. You can access either the chat or the Q&A. If I don't see them during, I will do my best to get to them at the end. Okay, so housekeeping points to note. We are recording the webinar. It's already turned on. We will send around the recording afterwards. Please do add questions. If you're kind of new to protocols.io and would like more information, because this is quite focused on the credit part, please do feel free to look up other webinars that we offer. We often have introductory webinars or more advanced functionality webinars, and they cover different time zones too. So if this time isn't that convenient for you, there will be other time zones that may be better suited. You can also sign up for a demo and you pick a slot that works for you. And in that scenario, you can bring questions and specific things that you're working on that you would like help with, and we'll be able to run through with you. So for today, I will run through a fairly short agenda, a bit of an introduction into the methods renaissance in the 21st century, how you can share publicly and how people do share publicly on protocols.io, how you can publish peer-reviewed methods and how that works alongside protocols.io, and also linking to protocols.io from research articles. So there'll be a bit about the history of reporting methods and method development, optimization, not getting the recognition as worthy of standalone publication and not getting the credit that it deserves, and how that's really changing now. It started to change about 20 years ago as methods started to be more recognized as an important independent output. And we'll just talk about how you can get credit in protocols.io. So for the first part, I will give you a little bit of background on how the research community started to better recognize and appreciate how methods and protocols could be shared and should be shared. So if we go back a little bit in time, the journal Nature Methods was actually only started in 2004. So the excerpt you can see here was from the inaugural editorial, and the founding editors said that their goal was to create a highly visible forum for the presentation of novel methods, because major methodological developments take their roots in the cross-fertilization of different disciplines. By contrast, the method sections of specialized journals, although they're extremely useful for targeted peer groups, they really don't give the technical information, the wide exposure needed to move more towards interdisciplinary exchanges. It's hard to cross between disciplines when you're in a very field-specific journal. So there's a great example of this a bit later on. But behind the scenes, what we learned from the founding editor of Nature Methods, Veronique Kierma, who later became the chief scientific officer at PLOS, where I was lucky enough to work with her. We learned from her that there was a lot of skepticism when we've spoken to her, even within the Nature Publishing group. So even though they were launching Nature Methods, they were not all convinced internally that it would be successful at that time. They said they published research and nobody was going to read just methods, and that it might dilute the brand. It might be impossible to fill a journal with sufficient papers that were just about methods and so on. But as we all know, Nature Methods was and still is hugely successful. It's interesting, though, to think that only relatively recently in 2004, there was still a lot of skepticism about that. We interviewed Veronique we have a podcast called Minor Tweak, Major Impact. There's an interview with her about this, which you might like to listen to if you would like more info. So we started with nature methods, but in that last 10 years, there's more and more journals now focusing on and publishing protocols and methods. There's a ton of different options for you available out there. Big publishers like Springer Nature keep expanding their portfolio of method-centered journals. They have Nature Protocols, which started 2 years after Nature Methods, and they've now also got the Protocol Exchange. Elsevier has Star Protocols and Methods X, but there's other independent initiatives like Jove, the Journal of Visualized Experiments, so that's a video-only journal. And there's also Bioprotocols, another open access journal, and others. So we're now in a place where journals, funders, and many researchers have realized it's not just code and data that we be sharing, we should also be sharing the methods. In that same kind of sense, you might realize or remember that it was only in the late 90s that we actually started to move away from please contact authors for code and data. I mean, it was really only in the 90s we started to get journals online in some instances, but it always used to be contact authors for code and data. And we moved in the last 20 years, I would say, towards requiring or expecting data and code to be available in repositories like GitHub and Dryad, Figshare. There's a whole host of different data specific repositories out there. And so methods have been playing catch up, but sharing the methods independently is definitely starting to be more the norm. So you've got more choices on how to share them and communicate those methods. So sharing publicly on protocols.io. So specifically moving and thinking about protocols.io, I'll talk first about how most people do share their methods in protocols.io, that's independently of papers. And then we'll talk a bit about the partnership that we have with protocols.io. Sorry, that we have with PLOS ONE. My brain is not sufficiently caffeinated with PLOS ONE to get your protocols peer-reviewed and published as a formal peer-reviewed manuscript. We've got many other partnerships and connections with other journals and publishers. So most journals and publishers are very supportive of using a tool like protocols.io to share methods. And let's face it, having a comprehensive step-by-step method on a repository platform like protocols.io is far more valuable and useful both to you in the future and now even and to others than narrative text in materials and methods of a manuscript that we see generally elsewhere. So now let's talk about how most people share using protocols.io. It is initially, I guess, primarily outwardly facing a public repository. So it's an open access repository. There are over 13,500 public protocols on there. And for anyone new to protocols.io, there's two sides. So this open access repository, so all of those 13,500 public protocols are discoverable with a CC BY license, a very open license, making them free to read, use, reuse. And it's also free to create an account on protocols.io and publish protocols. There are also, however, over 52,000 private protocols on protocols.io. They've been created by registered users. And that really is the business model behind the scenes of protocols.io, where we charge institutions for additional private space that allows researchers to optimize and develop methods before publication. They can have collaborative workspaces, really collaborate together on the methods in the lab and keep them all as sort of stewardship of research output. One thing, though, to highlight here is that every year about over 1 million viewers, users come to the repository protocols.io just to view public protocols that have been shared. Most of these public protocols are not actually tied to a specific peer-reviewed paper. They just sit on protocols.io. But the protocols themselves are citable independently from a research manuscript. So if you're not wanting to put it into a research manuscript and you just want to publish on protocols.io. That is still a research output that you can get credit for by way of citations to this output. We'll talk a little bit about the motivations for people sharing independently of a publication. But what I want to highlight is that despite independent sharing, there is a ton of traffic. And although about 60% of all traffic comes from Google searches, so people are just organically finding this content and landing on protocols. And actually, all of our protocol research content is about to be indexed by Google Scholar. So as an independent output, they become even more findable just out there on the internet. Geographically, when we look at where these people are from who are coming and looking at our content, I think only about 30% is from the US, and it's probably a similar amount from Europe, but it's very much global. Everyone else is all around the world. So there's a hugely global impact of sharing protocols on protocols.io. And I will quickly switch just a few examples to run through what it looks like on protocols.io. So it's a preloaded search that I've put in for Workspaces from Harvard Medical School. So this just shows you there are quite a few different workspaces that have been set up. These are public facing ones. And you can see at a glance, you know, how many published protocols they have, how many members there are in them. So if I switched, I've already opened up just to save my internet. The single cell ninjas is one which has been set up by a researcher who was involved with the Human Cell Atlas, where they wanted to really pick and highlight the best protocols in this area selected by these two researchers. And so that now has 136 members, and they have, you know, selected some of the best protocols in this area. You can see discussions, which are either comments on the protocols or actual seeded discussions around the area in general. So it's a really nice way to have a community on protocols.io. One of those other workspaces was the Laboratory of Systems Pharmacology. And again, they have 13 publications and 33 members. So you can start to see how this becomes really a nice way of gathering your published output together. But how does one go about publishing a protocol on protocols.io? This is not publishing as in a research journal. So this is just a workspace of mine. And if I open up a protocol that I've already got in here, just a test protocol, it's very, very quick and easy for me to choose to publish this and get a DOI for it. So the DOI is the digital object identifier. So if I click publish, hopefully it will load. Zoom makes this slightly more challenging with internet at the same time. And you should hopefully in a moment see that it's a quite quick step-by-step process. Now I'm not convinced that's going to load. It doesn't look like it wants to load. Let's try again going from here. I can do it also from the file manager. So if I click publish, okay, now that's loaded. We'll go with that one. It's a very quick six-step process, essentially. You will be nudged if you haven't filled in some of these areas to make sure you've added things like abstract text. So I've just put some placeholder in, authors and funders. Funder doesn't apply here, but if you have one, you can add in your funder and the grant ID. I'll add myself as an author, but you can also add, obviously, all your co-authors. You can remove any comments that you've had if you've been optimizing with colleagues. You want to state the protocol status and that it's a research protocol. You can pick if you want to share it to other workspaces when you go ahead and publish, because maybe you have just a public-facing workspace. Preview what you have in your protocol. And then next, at the very end, are these confirmations. In the same way that you would be expected to have approval from co-authors when you publish a research article, there is an expectation that you will have got agreement from your co-authors to do this at this point in time if you have them. It will be making the protocol permanently available with a DOI, and you won't be able to edit this version of it any further. So if I click those three and publish, that would take it through to the final publication step. That means that if you are somewhere with a license, the protocol would immediately get its DOI. If you're somewhere without a license, it would enter a screening process, very much like a preprint screening process, where we do not peer review, but we do just check that it's not spam or pseudoscience or something inappropriate to go up, essentially. And assuming none of those things, then we just tick yes, accept, and it goes on to be published, and you'll get an email with the DOI in it. So it's very, very simple process, as you can see, to get the DOI for your protocol. And then once you have published and got the DOI, it will appear with a DOI here. So here's just another example one that you can see. This example is linked with a paper that's been published in Nature Communications. So if you do then go on to link the protocol with a paper, you can add the citation to the research article later if you want to do so. I mentioned, so it does become uneditable with a DOI, but you can make new versions. So this one has 2 different versions. And if you want to, when there are multiple versions, you can compare them very, very easily to see what's changed between them. What else was I going to say about the protocol? Oh yeah, so you can see the history, you can do the checking, you can also look at the metrics to see all the version, what's happened, how many views, how many bookmarks and downloads, exports overall of the individual protocol. So this is a highly used and viewed protocol. So in terms of credit and understanding the value of a shared protocol, you can really see from the metrics here if other people are making use once you've made a protocol available. You would never have this kind of visibility into the materials and methods section of a research article itself. And you can see, although this was linked with the Nature Communications paper as the main one, it's also been cited in 2 other journals, and we track those sites here as well and show them if we find them. So that is that. And if we look at the metadata, you will have a protocol citation. So you can have a citation just for the protocol alone. You can download a bib file that you can import into EndNote or Mendeley or whichever your favorite reference management software is. But you also add the manuscript citation. So as soon as you have it, you can put the manuscript citation in here too. And we're very clear, please remember to cite the publication along with the protocol, because there are sensitivities around what the paper gets published or the protocol gets published. In some instances, what you will find is that the protocol has a very different author list, and it may not have the same first author as the manuscript that eventually goes with it. So that is another way that you can really reflect the appropriate credit to the authors of the protocol, the people who've developed the method, rather than maybe someone who applied the method and got some amazing data that they then published and the analysis is published. They really are 2 very separate things. And it's a live document. That's the other thing to say. So once you have it in here, readers can add questions and comments. So you can see some of them on here. And you can come in with an account, ask a question of the authors. The authors will be alerted and they can reply. So it really works like a live FAQ too on the protocol after publication. So if it's a method that you expect to have a lot of reuse, there's a lot of value to this in only having to answer a question once rather than multiple times by email. So that's just a few advantages of sharing on a platform like protocols.io. I would like to jump back to the slides and also add that we've seen researchers report that sharing and publishing detailed protocols leads to an increase in the number of collaborations and how successful they're being. So important to note before I move to talking about relationships with publishers is that since we launched in 2014, now having over 13,500 published papers, we have never ever seen a case of a publisher saying that because you shared on protocols.io, you can't publish your research or method paper in their journal. So publishers don't consider placing protocols on protocols.io to be a prior publication. It's very much like preprints on bioRxiv. So we've never ever seen a case of that early sharing of a method hurting authors or meaning they were unable to go on to publish the research paper. So we would always really encourage that early public sharing whenever possible. And from the publishing perspective, sharing on protocols.io gives you a method visibility. It lets you engage with the people who are using the method, as you've just seen, and makes it a central place where you can iterate and share corrections and optimizations very easily to and guide everyone naturally to the newer versions of the protocol. So it doesn't preclude further recognition by publishing it later as part of a peer-reviewed paper. And with that, we'll next move on to how you can publish the research, the protocols within a research article as well. So I'll talk first about a very specific partnership we've established with PLOS ONE, which fits in the narrative of the methods renaissance, because the idea is to bring more credit and recognition to the method development. So this partnership is a new article type at PLOS ONE called Lab Protocols. I'm going to click, hopefully this video will run through. This just shows you one of the lab article protocols published at PLOS ONE. At the top, you can see it's the lab protocol, and there's a very prominent link to see the protocol, both at the top, and it's a part of the materials and methods. So these article types are required to have the methods on protocols.io, and they are bidirectionally linked one to the other. So you go from the article to the protocol on protocols.io. It's clear it's the PLOS ONE paper, has a special peer-reviewed badge, and then all of the benefits of a protocol on protocols.io. So it becomes this step-by-step, much easier representation of a complicated method, as you can see. So that's highly beneficial. You can include also materials here and specific guidelines on protocols.io. The metrics again are available for anyone to look at after the fact alongside the citation. So that integration with PLOS ONE and protocols.io means the protocols front and center of the paper. And that bidirectional linkage just brings them together really, really nicely. So we launched this at the start of 2021 and have seen some really nice papers. The one that you've just looked at there was the very first one. But here are some lovely quotes from some of the authors. We have started putting some video spotlights of the authors of these alongside the protocols. So Monica, who comes from a small Latin American country, says this has made her famous in her country. This was a wastewater, SARS-CoV-2 RNA wastewater, and it was picked up by the New York Times, this protocol. So it got a lot of visibility. Jacopo, I'm going to show you a little bit more from him in a minute, but he was a PhD student. He published that first one that you just saw. Interestingly, although they're called lab protocols, that name is, it's a bit of a misnomer because it's really for any kind of research. And that was in a tool for visualization techniques in archaeology. And it was his first ever author and solo peer-reviewed paper. So he was thrilled. And then Simon Schroeder this was his first paper as a senior author. So we've had some lovely feedback from authors who've published these lab protocol articles. And I said you would see a little bit more from Jacopo. So that is what I have here. So when he published this lab protocol article, he tweeted amazingly how thrilled he was about having it up and that it was his first kind of solo author and first author paper as a PhD student. We did this spotlight interview with him, and hopefully you will hear the audio. Please pop in chat if it doesn't work, because if it doesn't, I'll just share the slides later and you can watch later. But it's a bit of the interview where he talks about what impact this had on his career. So it just lasts for a minute or two.
Hindsight.
This is Lenny.
Now that you've started the postdoc, when you look back in terms of the significance of the lab protocol for your career development, and just looking back, hopefully you're not regretting doing this. Like, how do you feel it fit into your PhD and into the postdoc transition and the reception of the lab protocol paper from your perspective?
I'm extremely proud of it. One of the things I'm really happy about is that, of course, it aided me in the completion and of my PhD and me getting a PhD. It's one of the things that, in my specific case, my PhD reviewers were really happy about and were really impressed by. So that's a point of honor for myself. But at the same time, I'm really happy of having it done for my own personal PhD, because it sort of gave a methodological section to it. While, especially in anthropology, is usually research project centered. So a context, a time period, a culture, being able to also develop a method and including a more technical aspect to it, I thought it complemented that really well. And although my PhD was specific to a time period and a region, I managed to add this methodological aspect that sort of went past those boundaries. Another really good thing that I think this protocol has done for my career is the recognition it gave me. As Lenny, you were saying, at first it kind of blew up. Many people started following along and were interested and got in touch with me. I was lucky enough to have been invited to lectures and practical sessions at various universities. And for just a standard, quite niche archaeological method, I think the article right now, after a year
hindsight.
Okay, sorry, there's an abrupt end there. But I think that gives you a sense of, you know, how impactful that was for Jacopo as part of his PhD, and helped him get his postdoc position, and he got many invitations for presentations at conferences globally. So I think, you know, we forget sometimes, or it's easy to overlook the value of the methods, where sometimes sharing the method can just be so much more impactful than you realize, especially if you've spent a long time honing something. It can be the most arduous part of your research project. Okay, so the final part of this is to show you how you can link to protocols.io from research articles. So you've seen how we have that integration with the lab protocols at PLOS One, but you can use links to protocols.io in any published research article. So we have some favorite tweets about the issues with standard approach of kind of what's presented in materials and methods of a research paper. So this is a biologist who got very frustrated looking for a protocol in a 97 paper, being bounced from multiple papers back in time to a 1987 paper that was paywalled, probably wasn't even online at that point in time. So the information's just not available. And similarly, on the right here is a tweet from a physicist who was looking at how devices were fabricated. So yeah, that was previously described by conventional methods. So it can be impossible from what's in a research paper right now, frequently, to actually know what was done, what experiments were performed. So a nice analogy I like to use for this is, if anyone watches the Great British Bake Off, the technical challenge that they have will have a statement like, bake a lemon meringue pie, but with 0 ingredient information, quantities, and no specific instructions. That to me is the equivalent of what we often see in a research article in terms of giving you instruction about what was actually undertaken as an experiment in that paper. However, you don't have to stick with that narrative, uninformative text. We have had discussions and chatted with editors and publishers from over 500 journals, and they are all, many of them, if you look in the instructions for authors, do actually recommend or encourage that you share methods details using protocols.io or a tool like protocols.io. There are obviously other journals where you can publish them, as we showed you earlier, but there really isn't another tool quite like protocols.io. Quite a few funders recommend this either as part of their grant author instructions. Some are more kind of hands-on. So ASAP, the Aligning Science Across Parkinson's, has created workspaces and provides support for all protocol sharing between all of their funded researchers before even publication, but then they also require publication of the protocols alongside research articles. So we see more and more of a move in that direction from all of these kind of authoritative locations, if you will. And I mentioned the licensing model with institutions who are providing more private access. And there are lots of examples of other journals where clearly it's perfectly fine. These are tweets from people talking about how they've got their protocols.io protocol in the methods of, this instance is a Gigabyte journal. Another one in the middle is from a current biology journal article. And on the right, quite a few Springer Nature open access book chapters that are protocols have been added to protocols.io as well. So we can better see how researchers actually interact with the protocols themselves on protocols.io, and having that more dynamic protocol available is helpful. And this is how it can look within an actual research article. So we jump back to another PLOS example. This is PLOS Biology, in which in the materials and methods, it says materials and methods are available as a collection. So I'm trying to get it to move with the highlighted. As a collection in protocols.io, and there's the DOI link that you can get. So they have a separate protocol for each of the different experiments, and it's possible on protocols.io to gather multiple separate protocols into a single collection, so that if that is what makes sense for your research article, you can link directly to the whole collection and then have individual links as well for the individual. So that's what the authors have done in this instance. And if you click the DOI, it will bring you to protocols.io. As you saw earlier, you can have multiple versions. So this is a really nice feature in that after you've published, you can actually come back and amend, better, further optimize the protocol, one of them or multiple of them in that collection, or clarify something. And when an author comes from the journal article, they'll always be told if there's a newer version and if they want to see the newer version. And with that compare functionality I showed you earlier, you'll be able to see what the differences were between them. And so you can come to the newer version and then track back if you want to. And you'll have the citations for both article and protocol in the metadata section, as I showed you before as well. I mentioned too that from the protocol citation, you can download a bib file and you can pull those into Mendeley or EndNote or whichever your reference management tool is of choice. And that's very easy then to not only have the DOI in the materials and methods, which is quite nice to have that live link directly from the location, you can also have the citation to the protocol to make sure that the credit part happens as well, for the protocol to be cited down the line. Second to last thing I'll mention before I stop is that although we are all very familiar with supplementary files and documents and papers, there's a huge push for a number of years to move away from supplements and use repositories instead. And this is a really nice article in The Scientist about that. And there's lots of reasons we could go into why supporting information, supplementary information files are not a very safe or stable place to put this information. But I guess one of the most compelling is that the repositories are just much more dynamic. As we've shown you, you can really interact with the content on protocols.io. And the last thing I'll share is that when you use repositories and can publish your methods separately from the paper, you also increase discoverability and reuse of the method itself. So this slide shows a really nice example. There's a tweet in the top left here from a researcher in Chile who was looking for an experiment for RNA extraction for primary cortical neuron cultures, so brain cells essentially. Research from UCFF pointed to a protocol on protocols.io for RNA extraction. And it turns out that this protocol came within a research article in GigaScience on a 3-spine stickleback parasite, so a fish parasite. So it seems incredibly unlikely that we'd have got the brain cell researcher up here would have found this paper and realized it was a location for an experiment that would work for them. However, because the protocol is independently available, it's meant it's very, very findable and usable for researchers and facilitates those research connections that are very hard to come by otherwise. I have got a couple of quick last things. If you publish them, they're all citable, they're all archived in exactly the same way a journal would do. We're held to the same high standards to ensure longevity of content. And this dynamic permanence and clocks is controlled, lots of copies, keep stuff safe. These are all the things that publishers do. So we are very careful to make sure that we're ticking all of the boxes that you would expect of anyone publishing content out there in terms of preservation practices, etc. And then final slide, just to kind of highlight all of those benefits of linking to protocols.io from your articles. I'm going to just jump to the bottom one there, which is that you get credit. But really, there are many, many, many benefits here. Not least, you start moving into the open research community. And this is something that's being more and more required at the very high level. UNESCO Open Science push includes requirements for sharing of protocols and methods in there. Also, the federal move in America is pushing this way too. So there are lots of reasons really, but the best one is kind of those selfish reasons of the enhancement to your own research practice and your research outputs and the credit that you can get for making your methods available. And with that, I will clearly it's not December 6th, it's December 13th. I've lost track of time, but I'm ready and happy to take questions. And I will stop the screen share so I can find, I think I saw one question come in, but I wasn't able to multitask enough at the time. So let me have a quick look. Is it possible, so just get all the windows open, to publish every research method steps or any reviewed documents having some steps? I'm not 100% sure I fully understand that question, but it's entirely up to you what you publish. So you can decide when the protocol is complete enough and you're ready to publish it, make it available. If you've already had, I mean, it doesn't have to be peer reviewed. So what goes on protocols.io isn't peer reviewed unless you submit it to a journal, either via a partnership like the +1 Lab Protocols, or you link to it within a research article, in which case you would hope it be reviewed. But the control of when to publish is entirely up to you. You do publish a whole protocol, though you couldn't separate out individual steps at all. I'm not sure if I've answered that very well or not, but if you want to clarify further, I'm happy to answer. And then happy to take any other questions if anyone has any. Just to make sure I understand correctly, as soon as my protocol gets a DOI, it will be findable on databases such as PubMed, or would that only work with the +1 peer-reviewed version? That's a really good question, Maren. Hi. So if you publish and get a DOI for your protocol, it will not immediately be findable on PubMed. So PubMed right now doesn't index our content. However, I think that is coming. Europe PMC have said that they will index some of our content. Google Scholar is about to start, literally, I think today, indexing protocol content on protocols.io. So they're findable using search tools like Google, and soon they will be available and you'll find them in Google Scholar. The +1 peer-reviewed version, they would be findable there. I mean, the +1 article would be findable there on PubMed. I hope that makes sense. But this indexing and seeing the protocols.io DOI as valuable in and of itself is coming more and more. We send, because we obtain the DOIs through Crossref. Crossref also propagates a lot of this information. So some other places also pull it in. ResearchGate will pull in the content. If you've linked your account on protocols.io with your ORCID account, then once you've published them, they will push to your ORCID profile as a work output on your ORCID profile too. Well, as I mentioned earlier, you can also feel free to sign up for a demo any other time. Or someone has a hand up. Isaac, if you want to type in the question, that would be great. Oh, we've got a couple more. Maren says, does the protocols.io DOI and +1 DOI be the same when you publish? No, they're not merged, they're separate. So the +1 article will have its own DOI, and then embedded within will be the DOI for the either individual protocol or multiple DOIs if you have multiple protocols that correspond. So they're separate, and it's important that they're separate too, because the +1 DOI is for the entire article, and the protocol DOI is for whatever you've put on protocols.io. So they're modular, if that makes sense. What's really nice though is that because they have this modular approach, you can add new versions to the protocols.io protocols. So as this is this dynamic permanence that we talk about. The paper will always be there. It will always link to the protocol that you published at the time of publication. But if you realized there was an error in the method or something was very unclear in how you'd presented it, you can make a new version that will get a new DOI, but they will all be linked together. So it becomes much more of a living document, a living research output, which is much more captures how science and how research normally works. Right, I'm going to quickly jump across to the Q&A. I'm getting questions in a few places. So Stefania, can one publish protocols that we commonly use but have not necessarily developed beyond some customizations, maybe e.g. a method for measuring total? So yes, that's a really good question. Absolutely, you can. We would encourage that you attribute original authors, obviously, if you're putting something up there that you've adapted from someone else. What's really lovely is if it's already on protocols.io, I didn't go into it today, but we have functionality called forking. So if there's a protocol that's really useful to you on protocols.io, but when you perform it, you would have to do things slightly differently due to equipment or reagents, you can fork a version and it will show the relationship to the original one, but you can then edit it as how you've ever tweaked it, the customizations you've made for yourself. If it was in a published research article and you have gone to those authors, got the full details, managed to get it working, and you want to share those details, we absolutely encourage that. As a courtesy, probably getting in touch with those authors and letting them know. If they wanted, they could be still listed as the authors of the protocol. You can add the authors, but the owner can be different. So if you've taken the time to put it in because it's the version that you're using in your lab, you can remain as the owner who will get alerts if someone comments, but you can still give kind of attribution to the people who originally developed it, or you can add the manuscript citation to the original one. But yes, if it's valuable to you to have it in that format, chances are it's valuable to someone else as well. So hopefully I've answered that one. Feel free to follow up if you've got any other questions. There's another one around, is the use of protocols.io free? Yes, it is. Anyone can make an account for free. They will just have a basic open research account. It will allow them to publish as many protocols as they like. So if you're publishing, you can do as many as you want for free. Very much mission focus of the organization is to encourage open sharing and early sharing really of science and research content. You will only be limited with the free account to 5 private files. So as long as you continue to publish, that won't limit you too much. But if you wanted to do lots of behind the scenes sharing and collaborating before you make things content, that would be a little bit more limiting for you. And that's where the licensing part comes in. But you absolutely can use it for free. Many people do, and they make it work and they publish quite a lot. But if you're interested in more information about the licenses for your institution, feel free to get in touch with us and we can suggest how to approach. So Isaac, sorry, yeah, you asked if there was any cost to publishing protocols. So hopefully I've just answered that question for you. Absolutely no cost. If you're using or attempting to publish as part of the +1 lab protocols, then there is the charge at +1, but that is completely independent from us. So we don't have control over, but they do have a waiver program there as well. So there would be cost for the publication in a journal, but not for the part that's on protocols.io. And Samir says, will you share the recording later? Yes, this has been recorded. I guess I'm still recording now, I'll probably turn that off in a moment, but we will share the link. It will be emailed around to everybody who registered for the webinar. So you'll all get the recording, a link to the recording, but also a link to the slides. So if you want any of the URLs that were on the slides, you can grab those from there too. And I will pop my email into the chat too. And if anyone has any questions, you're more than welcome to follow up with me directly after the fact as well. We'll wait for a couple more minutes just to see if anybody has any more questions, but if not, then thank you everybody so much for joining today. Please be in touch if you have any other issues around protocols.io or want to learn more, and I will stop that recording now.